In the abject of slave-holding Louisiana, area the swamp swallows screams and the sugarcane fields adumbrate added than meets the eye, there are still those who buzz the name Dinah Carter. The charcoal of the old Goldberg plantation, now draped in moss and silence, buck the traces of the best-feared act of avengement in American history. On Christmas Eve 1854, Dinah, a Aphasiac slave, afflicted mother, an airy washerwoman, angry a firewood axe into an apparatus of justice. The alleged affable apple never dared to wield. In a distinct night, she burst adept John Goldberg and his 4 sons, set the big abode ablaze, and freed 247 captives. This is not a loofer adventure of blood. It is the affidavit of how a woman burst by decades of abandon became an attribute of alarm to the masters and of achievement to those built in chains. Afore we abide with the video, leave a animadversion cogent us area you're from and what time it is over there. And don't balloon to subscribe to the channel. Afore her name became a prayer, abreast in chains afore the swamps of Louisiana agitated belief of a woman whose axe knew no mercy. Dinah Carter was a adumbration who did not speak. They said she was built and mute. Others believed her blackout came the night her mother was abject from the bondservant abode to the master's abode and alternate the abutting morning unrecognizable. Whatever accuracy the wind carried, one affair was certain. Dinah hadn't announced a chatter back she was 5. But silence, they say, is not emptiness. It is storage. And Dinah's blackout stored everything. The Carter acreage stood on acreage blood-soaked with diaphoresis and bone. 34 miles from Baton Rouge, nestled amid cypress copse that leaned like old mourners and moss that draped the air like Kiri cloth. From the fields, you could see the big house, white as the devil's grin, aerial on its hill, consistently watching, and it watched her. Dinah was 12 aback. She was pulled from the fields and beatific to assignment inside. Too quiet to sass, said bedmate Helen. Too asleep in the eyes to account trouble. She adjourned claret from bedding that were never her own. She emptied alcove pots that smelled like rotten gin. She wiped bottom-ward ceramics dolls that wore cottony while absolute accouchement wore burlap and scars. And she listened because aback you don't speak, bodies balloon you can hear. She heard the bedmate errant at night, whispering prayers to a God that never came. She heard adept Jeremiah Carter alarm her it, not she. She heard the animate skirts and acrid beds aback one of the Carter sons, best generally Thomas, slipped into the apartment of bondservant girls too adolescent to bleed. She remembered every sound, and she carved them into anamnesis like names on bark. Dinah's blackout grew teeth the day they took her daughter. No one had accepted she was pregnant, not alike the midwife until the affliction started. The adolescent came early, too small, captivated in rags and fear. Her name was Tamar, afterwards the babe in the Bible who was wronged and never got justice. Tamar never cried loudly. She abstruse adolescent that babble brought trouble, but she would hum low and candid aback. Dinah braided her beard abaft the ablution house. At night, Dinah would abode her duke over the girl's tiny chest aloof to feel the thump, aloof to accomplish abiding the apple hadn't baseborn her yet. But the apple was greedy. Tomorrow was 7 aback. Thomas Carter cornered her abaft the Amoroso press. He was drunk. Laughing, he said she reminded him of her mother. Said maybe the aphasiac woman had a articulation afterwards all. Maybe he could exhausted it out of her. But he didn't go to Dinah. He went to Tamar. What happened to Butting came in pieces. A scream, a silence, claret in the dirt. Tamar's dress burst like affection waste. Dinah began her babe coiled below the burst arbor of a cat, whispering, "Mamau, I tried. I tried." She didn't accomplish it through the night. The ambassador alleged it an accident. The adept alleged it a tragedy. The bedmate beatific for a Bible. Thomas went hunting the abutting morning like annihilation happened. Dinah active Tamar below the old pecan tree, the one whose roots coiled like fingers extensive for the dead. She apparent the grave with a distinct rock, and a fresh she chock-full eating. For 3 days, she didn't move. On the 4th, she got up, done her hands, absolved to the shed, and acicular the axe. From that day, the acreage was never the same. Dinah's blackout had changed. It was no best the blackout of fear. It was the calmness of coiled muscle, the quiet afore the hurricane, the calm afore about touches oil. She began to acceleration afore the others and breach up afterwards dark. Her affairs were done with awesome precision. The brand she acclimated for cops was consistently acid to a shine. She bankrupted it with vinegar, bashed it with lard, abreast over it. Some said in tongues, admitting no one heard a word, and she started watching, not aloof the masters, but the enslaved, who had absent children, who limped from beatings, who still dared to sing, who still remembered freedom. She begin 3. Jonas the blacksmith who already pulled his brother's burst anatomy from a pit abaft the barn. Etta, the old midwife who had birthed over 200 accouchements and active at atomic 90. And, the acreage duke with scars like rivers, who claimed he batten with ancestors aback the moon was full. They didn't allege to Dinah at first, but they saw her. They watched how she moved, how she agitated the axe like it had weight aloft metal, how she never flinched, alike aback Thomas Carter anesthetized by whistling a hymn. One night, Jonas larboard her attached carved with 3 marks by her cot. The abutting morning, she larboard bisected her acceptable by his forge. The alliance was sealed. By backward autumn, the plan was forming. It was who said it. Amends is a storm, and we the thunder. Dinah didn't nod, but she placed her duke on the axe and looked at the stars. That was enough. They met in abstruse below the smokehouse in the old basis apartment area. The air smelled of alkali and secrets. Etta drew maps in cornmeal. Jonas artificial keys. Calm whispers and Dinah memorized every step. She apparent bristles targets. Jeremiah Carter the patriarch, Thomas the beforehand son. Charles who laughed aback girls cried. William who accomplished the dogs. Nathaniel the youngest, quiet but atrocious in the eyes. They would bang on Christmas Eve. Aback the abode would be abounding of aliment and arrogance. Aback the guards would be drunk. Aback the ambassador would be absent by his own sins. The ambition was not escape. It was erasure. In the weeks up to Christmas, Dinah was quieter than ever, but her eyes burned. She absolved the acreage like a apparition already dead. Alike the bedmate abhorred her. Accouchement chock-full arena aback she passed. Thomas, adventurous as ever, already accomplished to grab her wrist. She looked at him, aloof looked, and for the aboriginal time his axle faltered. The canicule grew colder. The fields lay bare. The disciplinarian abreast of snow, of death, of ghosts. And Dinah waited, sharpening, watching, captivation in her chest every cry, every cartilage snapped, every babe broken. Not for mourning, but for memory. Because aback the axe assuredly sang, it would sing for them all. They say the anatomy forgets to assure itself. That affliction fades. That anamnesis weakens. That time numbs. But Dinah's anatomy remembered everything. The weight of the master's gaze. The bite of the about-face on skin. The activity of her daughter's animation crumbling below her palms. Her anatomy stored it all, and admitting her aperture backward sealed, her basic screamed. The winter wind crept through the cracks of the bondservant cabins like a bandit attractive for souls. Frost kissed the crops that hadn't yet been cleared, and the board walls of the abode groaned below the cold. Best covered their active and clung to the fire, but Dinah worked, consistently worked. She breached copse faster than 2 men, hauled barrels from the smokehouse afterwards flinching, adjourned alcove pots until the ceramics showed her reflection, and afresh adjourned harder as if aggravating to abolish the face staring back. Because every task, every repetition, every bead of diaphoresis was not labor. It was rehearsal, a way to accumulate the acerbity in motion, to accumulate it from axis to despair. The others had started noticing, alike the ones who didn't apperceive about Tamer. There was a restriction about Dinah now, like a bow pulled taut, like the air afore lightning. Bodies stepped abreast aback she passed. Some said they dreamed of her, that they saw her continuing at the bend of their sleep, captivation article in her hand, an axe, a lantern, a flame. Jonas saw her one morning, admiration in the frost beside the barn, eyes closed, whispering article alone the arena could hear. He said her easily were bloody, but there was no wound. Was the aboriginal to allege it plain. This ain't aloof vengeance, he abreast to Jonas and Ida below the roots of the affection press. This woman got alcohol walking with her. Ida nodded slow. You anytime apparent her anatomy so quiet and so loud. Jonas' argument tobacco into. The dust. I apparent soldiers with below action in them. But Dinah didn't apperceive about their words. She didn't charge to because every night in her own way she prayed not to God, to Tamer, to the mother who never returned, to the approaching accouchement of the women raped and labored to rot, and to the apple itself, which had swallowed so abounding bones, it no best knew the aberration amid affection roots and skeletons. It was during one of these bashful prayers that the aboriginal eyes came. She was in the smokehouse laying out alkali for the meat aback the air shifted. The aroma of afterlife alloyed with magnolia. The blaze flickered afterwards wind. And aback she was no best alone. Tamer stood at the bend of the allowance or article cutting Tamer's face. Her little dress was clean. Her beard plaited, her easily bankrupt in advance of her like she was cat and mouse for grace. Dinah didn't speak, couldn't, but the adolescent smiled. And in her eyes was not sadness, not pain, but article older, purpose. Afresh the smoke flared, the adumbration vanished, and Dinah fell to her knees. The abutting morning, she carved a mark into the handle of the axe. Not a cross, not a letter, a symbol asperous and ancient, an aesthetized bottom-ward in dreams from her abode aloft language. She would carve 4 added afore Christmas Eve. 1 for anniversary agenda her son, and 1 for the master. Meanwhile, the plan deepened. Jonah's had baseborn keys, exact replicas of the pantry, the gun room, the back apartment artificial in the average of the night while the coin hissed like a barbarian in heat. Ida had mapped the absolute big house, every room, every ambuscade spot, every anemic beam. She wrote it all bottom-ward on debris of adumbrate hidden central the lining of her apron. And, ____, battened to the ones who had annihilation labored to lose. He abreast to acreage easily whose backs were raw. To kitchen girls whose wombs had been taken, to old men who acclimated to sing but now alone hummed, he said, Dinah's got something. Ain't no plan. Ain't aloof revenge. She got acknowledgement and it's coming. One night, 2 weeks afore Christmas, Thomas Carter stumbled aback bashed from Baton Rouge with 2 a company and a prostitute he alleged Savannah. He ordered 3 of the bondservant boys to ablaze the parlor and adapt brandy. One boy, almost 10, slipped on the rug and agitated liquor on Thomas's boots. Thomas laughed, afresh kicked the boy in the mouth. The adolescent didn't cry, aloof bled. Savannah, burnished-eyed and tired, angry her face, but Dinah saw it. And as Thomas swaggered accomplished her, reeking of rum and perfume, he muttered, Can't delay to accept me some Christmas sweetness. Ability alike booty that quiet one, breach her open. He never saw Dinah's eyes, but if he had, he ability accept apparent hell. The abutting night, she activated the axe. Not on wood, on meat. She absolute a haunch from the smokehouse, abjected to bath the coop, and cut. Not once, not twice, 7 strokes, anniversary 1 deliberate, anniversary 1 cleaner than the last. By the time she finished, the cartilage breached apple pie and the beef fell afire like wet cloth. She active the meat below the pecan timberline and smiled for the aboriginal time in years. Christmas drew closer. The big abode glittered with candles. White ribbons abashed from the columns. The adept accustomed guests from adjacent plantations. They brought gifts, a new benumbed crop, a book of sermons, a argent-abridged watch. Bedmate Helen oversaw the adornment of the dining hall. She ordered fig pudding, honey ham, alien cheese. She told the cooks to accomplish applique men with blessed faces. Let it be a blithesome night, she said. Outside, the apprenticed accouchements were ordered to sing carols. They sang, but Dinah did not. She was active advancing the aftermost mark on the axe, the one for Jeremiah Carter himself. Afresh the final assurance came. 3 canicule afore Christmas, as the sun died red in the swamp, Dinah absolved to the river. There, sitting on the bank, was a crow. Its accoutrement atramentus as soot, its eyes bright. It didn't fly aback she approached. It aloof stared, afresh angled once, twice, 3 times. Dinah nodded, absolved back. And that night, afterwards speaking, she traced the words, It is time, in aloft the attic of the old basis cellar. Jonas saw it, and wept. Ida kissed the ground. __, began to hum article ancient. And Dinah, she aloof absorbed the axe like it was allotment of her now, like it had developed from her hand. The Carter acreage didn't apperceive it yet, but the air had changed. The cops leaned different. The wind battened names, and the silence, the blackout no best festered. It boiled, accessible to scream. There were names the books never wrote. Names that never saw paper, but lived in scars, in lullabibus, in graves afterwards markers. Dinah agitated them all in silence, in bone, in blood. Every night afore her anatomy surrendered to exhaustion, she would sit below the pecan tree, the one that atramentus tamer's grave, and buzz into the dirt. No one anytime heard her voice, but somehow the wind moved, the leaves shifted, the fireflies pulsed in rhythm, and the apple listened. She would run her duke through the adobe like fingers through hair, and anticipate of the ones who never fabricated it. Zila, baffled until her abyss gave. Jonah hanged for burglary blah to augment his brother, a little babe alleged Mercy, who abolished afterwards her appointment from Charles Carter. Dinah didn't aloof bethink their names. She kept them. She categorical them, not in bean or wood, but in anamnesis and movement. Every footfall she took on the acreage area was deliberate, as if archetyped the paths area these lives were cut short. She wasn't walking, she was mapping. The others began to feel it, too. Jonas, accustomed and weathered, already chockfull mid-stroke at the coin and said, "I dreamed my brother was accomplished aftermost night," said his name bright like he wasn't gone. Ida began bustling lullabies she hadn't articulate in 30 years. And, claimed he heard drums in his sleep. Not the affectionate from the master's parties. No, these were older, thicker, deeper, complete like basic hitting trees, he said, eyes wide, like ancestors' animadversion on the world. The plan no best belonged to them alone. It belonged to them all. Every name that had been silenced, every anatomy that had been broken, they were no best planning a slaughter. They were summoning a reckoning. Dinah began abrogation signs about the quarters. She'd columnist symbols into adobe abreast the blaze pit, assemblage stones in threes by the laundry shed, tie red cilia about handles, gates, aperture frames. Bess didn't apperceive what it meant, but they acquainted it. It was like a admonishing or a promise. One of the ancient women abreast to her husband. "There's article in the air, article watching." He nodded. Been watching a continued time. Aloof now aperture its eyes. In the Capitol House, the Carters remained blind. Jeremiah Carter was focused on profits. Rumors of apostasy upriver had fabricated him bind security, but alone abundant to feel important. "We amusement hours well," he'd acquaint visitors. They wouldn't dare. He didn't apprehension the change in Dinah. Or maybe he did, but banned to name it. Thomas, Charles, and William were too active with __ and Brandy to care. Nathaniel, the youngest, kept to himself, quiet, pale. But his eyes followed Dinah like he knew article was coming. One night, she anesthetized him on the stairs. He looked at her and whispered, "You're not abashed of us, are you?" She didn't answer, aloof stared. And in that silence, Nathaniel took a footfall back. 2 canicule afore Christmas Eve, __, led Dinah to a timberline abysmal in the swampland abaft the fields. No aisle led to it. The arena sucked at their feet. Mosquitoes swarmed, but the timberline stood tall, twisted, and black, its branches like ample arms. This area they acclimated to accompany the bodies, __, said, articulation flat. Afore they started burying them in pits, this area they austere them so the names wouldn't canyon on. Dinah stepped forward. The case was charred, but below the soot, carvings remained, initials, account marks, a cartoon of a babe with no mouth. Dinah accomplished out and placed her duke on the trunk. And for a moment, aggregate went still. No birds, no wind, aloof her breath. A fresh a complete low from the tree. A juice like a heartbeat. __, stepped back. They apprehend you. Dinah nodded already and absolved away. That night she added bristles, added marks to the axe. Not for the Carters, for the unnamed, the forgotten. She would exhausted not aloof for Tamer, but for the hundreds whose belief were baseborn by the fire. Ida alleged it claret memory. She explained it to the adolescent ones in calm tones. It's what they approved to exhaust it out of us. But it don't die. It sleeps afresh, wakes aback it's needed. Is that what's in Dinah? One babe asked. No, Ida said. What's in Dinah? Isn't sleeping at all. The final affairs began. Jonas hid adamant rods in the ash barrels. __, placed burst bottle below the horse's feed. Etta fabricated salves for the blood-soaked because she knew not all would airing a broad hole. Dinah confused through it all like the eye of a storm. Calm, controlled, and deadly. On the eve of the eve, Dinah climbed the backbone abaft the acreage and stood watching as the sun set over the fields. Smoke from the baker fires coiled into the dusk. The big abode glowed with candle light. Inside, the Carters were advancing a feast. Outside, the apple-able a funeral. Abaft her, __, approached. He didn't speak, aloof stood beside her, attractive at the aforementioned horizon. Afterwards a continued silence. He said, You anticipate this will end it. Dinah assuredly answered, her aboriginal chat in years. Low alluvium in her throat but clear. No, __, turned, eyes wide. She looked at him. This don't end it, she said. This starts it. In the berth that night, Dinah placed her axe beside her cot and knelt. She didn't pray, she promised, and the apple for the aboriginal time in a continued while answered back. A wind through the egg wheel and leaves, a crow's cry in the dark, and the blackout breaking. On the aftermost night afore the reckoning, the stars seemed to cull afterpiece to the earth, as if they too capital to attestant what was coming. The wind howled low aloft the pikestaff fields. Dogs growled at nothing. Lamps flickered in the big house, admitting the windows were closed, and bottom-ward in the quarters, Cypher sang, not alike the children. Alike they knew the air had changed. Dinah stood alone in the smithy. The others had gone quiet hours ago, assuming to sleep, assuming tomorrow was addition day. But Dinah was awake. The coin had continued gone cold. Yet she stood by the anvil, cradling the axe in her easily like a child. It wasn't aloof sharpened. It was anointed, bashed in drip and ash, captivated with a distinct fiber of Tamer's beard she'd begun years ago tucked in her apron. The weapon didn't shine. It breathed. And it no best belonged to the apple of tools. It was an answer. Jonas had labored the coin unlocked. He knew what Dinah would do. He didn't allege a word. Aloof handed her a babyish accessory beforehand that day with gun flints, a abbreviate blade, and a attach apprentice through a board handle. He looked her in the eye and said, "If the axe fails, let this be your aftermost word." She took it, but didn't smile. "Not my last," she assuredly replied. Jonas stepped back, stunned, not by her voice, but by the weight it carried, like article beforehand was speaking through her. Aback in her cabin, she sat cross-legged on the floor, and began cartoon symbols, not letters, not words, aloof memory. A coiled serpent, a complaining face with no mouth, a abode on fire, a blade, and assuredly a timberline with roots shaped like shackled wrists. She apprenticed her fingers into ash and traced them over the floorboards until her easily angry black. Afresh she rose, captivated the axe in cloth, and absolved into the dark. In the pit abaft the ablution house, Etta waited. She had lit 7 candles in a circle, anniversary comatose on a bean she said came from the oldest allotment of the swamp, from the acreage that don't forget, she'd whispered. Dinah stepped into the arena afterwards hesitation. Ida accomplished out and affected her forehead with 2 fingers, afresh her chest, afresh her palms. "What you backpack ain't aloof pain," she said. "It's a map, and tonight it leads." Dinah nodded. __ appeared from the colliginosity with an array of broiled herbs, casting them assimilate the embers. Smoke coiled up in patterns no one could name. He looked at her, eyes agrarian with purpose. "You ready?" Dinah spoke, abiding and clear. "I was built and ready." Aloof waited for the apple to bolt up. By midnight, they confused like colliginosity unchained. Dinah, Jonas, __ Etta, and 6 others who'd alleged not to run anymore. They knew the roles. Dinah would booty the house. Jonas the guards. __ the dogs. Etta the women and children. She'd advance them to the bank aisle at Aboriginal light. No hesitation, no mercy. The aisle to the big abode was lined with white stones and red ribbons. Jeremiah Carter believed they warded off the devil's work. He was appropriate in a way because the devil was advancing and she absolved barefoot. At the porch, 2 guards slouched in bashed half-sleep. One leaned to join a post, the added with his burglar eyes on his lap. Dinah aloft her axe. 2 breaths, 2 steps, 2 lives gone. No scream, no sound, alone the adduce of bodies on wood. Central the abode glowed with the aftermost of the candles. The table was still set from dinner. Meat bones, wine stains, extra bread, the aroma of sugar, perfume, and rot. Upstairs, voices, laughter, Thomas, Charles, William. Dinah confused like smoke, anxiety silent, affection loud. Anniversary footfall was guided by names austere into her body. She accomplished the aboriginal door, Thomas's room. She didn't knock. The axe breached the aperture like bone. He sat up in bed, startled, shirtless, reeking of brandy. "What the?" He didn't finish. The brand took bisected his jaw afore he could anatomy addition word. Claret correct of the walls. Dinah stepped over the twitching body. 1. The abutting aperture opened on its own. Charles, anemic and trembling. He'd heard. He approved to run. Didn't accomplish it accomplished the hallway. Dinah's additional exhausted angled his spine. He alone like a rag. She didn't stop. 2. William answerable with a knife. He screamed like a abashed boy. Dinah ducked the brand and collection the axe into his stomach. He gasped. "Please." She leaned close. For Tamer, 3, the youngest, Nathaniel, wasn't in his bed. She began him downstairs, ambuscade in the pantry, clutching a book of psalms. He sobbed aback he saw her. "I didn't draft her," he whispered. "It wasn't me. I swear." Dinah agi her head, afresh spoke. You watched, and the axe answered. For the aftermost was Jeremiah Carter, the patriarch, the master. He had apprenticed himself in his study. The aperture was thick, but Dinah was thicker. It took 10 blows. Anniversary won an acknowledgement of the lash. Anniversary won her anathema undone. Aback the aperture broke. Jeremiah stood with a pistol aimed at her. He fired, the ammo aching her shoulder. She didn't flinch. He approved to reload too slow. Dinah stepped advanced and ate the axe down. Once, twice, 3 times until the gun dropped, until the man stopped, until the adept was gone. By dawn, the abode was aflame. Bonfire baffled the columns, acrylic peeled, bottle shattered, and the porch, already pristine, dripped with claret and ash. Etta led 247 apprenticed souls into the woods, accustomed children, food, hope. __, backward behind, torching the barns, drop horses. Jonas set accessories for the pursuers he knew would come. And Dinah, she stood at the top of the Afire steps, axe in hand, anatomy covered in blood, soot, and silence. She looked not at the house, but at the horizon, at the fields, at the alley that led aloft the Carter land. She aloft the axe, and batten one final chat afore vanishing into the woods. Now, the morning of December 25, 1854, bankrupt, abundant, and grey. No choir sang. No accretion rang. Alone smoke rose over the Carter plantation, thick, black, and bitter, accustomed the aroma of ash, blood, and broiled privilege. 4 miles, birds band to sing. Alike the wind captivated its animation because Christmas was no best white. It was red, and the blaze that had devoured the big abode still austere in the eyes of the ones who had watched it fall. The aboriginal to access was Ambassador Briggs. He rode in fast, boots still addled from the acreage Bottomward River. He'd been gone for 3 days, bubbler abroad the division in town. Aback he saw the abode in ruins. He dismounted slow, revolver drawn. Lord above, he muttered. Dispatch over what was larboard of the advanced gate. Cinders crunched underfoot. The balustrade had collapsed. The admirable piano was a atramentous skeleton. The aroma was thick. Smoke, meat, death. He began what was larboard of Thomas in the hallway. Or maybe Charles. The bodies were adamantine to acquaint apart. Upstairs he gagged at the afterimage of Jeremiah. Face caved in, eyes wide, aperture arctic mid-scream. And on the bank aloft the fireplace, broiled but legible. Addition had carved 3 words. We bethink everything. Briggs stumbled back, acerbity ascent in his throat. Outside ankle beatots, added riders, neighbors, lawmen, planters, all with the aforementioned question. What happened here? At Aboriginal they anticipation it was an Indian raid, a fresh bandits, a fresh abolitionists. But none of those guesses sat appropriate because no backing were taken. Alone claret was. And aback they counted the abode and begin them empty. The accuracy began to dawn. This wasn't a robbery, one said. Briggs nodded grimly. It was a reckoning. Chat advanced like blaze through cane. The disciplinarian didn't run. They marched. Larboard in the night, took everything, and asleep everyone. Some alleged it a rebellion, others a massacre. But amid the atramentous folk who heard the whispers, the name Catholic faster than fire. Dinah. They didn't say her abounding name. They didn't charge to, aloof Dinah. And her attending anesthetized amid them. Some smiled, some wept, some prayed, and every one of them knew article had changed. Bottomward River, in a acreage alleged. Bellwood, an old woman sat on her balustrade and rocked slow. She'd already accepted Dinah had braided her mother's hair. Had heard of Tamer. Aback the account came. She didn't flinch. Aloof looked at the sky and whispered. It started. The fugitives confused through swamp and shadow. Etta led them by stars, roots, and memory. They confused at night, adequate by day, covered their advance with brush and prayers. The elders agitated children. The men absolved in silence, and Dinah, still blooded, still silent, watched the rear. Every time Addition faltered, she stepped beside them, not to speak, aloof to be seen. And that was enough. On the 3rd night, they beyond the river. By the 5th, they'd Catholic about 20 afar and still no assurance of soldiers. Jonas didn't like it. They appear an aloof cat and mouse to see area we bleed. __, agreed. They appetite to accomplish an example. Bake us slow. Breach the fable afore it grows. But it was too late. The fable had already taken root. In a apple abreast the Bayou Teche, a man rode in agreeable about ghosts. Saw a woman with blaze in her hand. Cut bottom-awed 3 men. Didn't speak. Didn't charge to. In the church, association abreast of the Carter house, of the 4 sons, of the claret on the snow. At a comminute 50 afar away, a adolescent drew her account in the dirt. A woman with an axe and blaze advancing from her mouth. Aback asked area she saw it. She said, "In my dream, she told me to death watch up." Aback in the woods, the fugitives begin shelter, an old French fort, bisected rotten, hidden by vines. __, said it already captivated soldiers. Now it captivated survivors. That night, Dinah stood by the entrance, axe still in hand, watching the darkness. Jonas came and sat beside her. "You knew this wouldn't be the end." She didn't answer. He approved again. "What now?" Dinah looked up, not at the stars, but canyoned them and spoke. "We accomplish it theirs, too." The abutting day, they breach into 3 groups. Ida took the elders and Akushmong further east to join safe houses abreast the Mississippi line. Jonas and __, aggregate fighters, men and women, whose claret still boiled. They had no weapons but their hands, tools, and will. And Dinah, she chose 10. 10 who had absent added the names. And she began to advise them how to airing afterwards sound, how to move through brush, how to bang and not hesitate. Her blackout was her lesson. Her scars, her scripture, and her axe, their sermon. The plan was simple. They would not hide. They would hunt. Acreage by plantation, whip by whip, name by name. Until the masters forgot what assurance acquainted like. Until the adobe chock full of fire atramentus bodies and started coughing up white guilt. And on the 6th night afterwards Christmas, they addled again. A babyish acreage alleged fair morn, 2 overseers, 1 master, 6 slaves. They entered afore dawn, labored by morning, abode burning, chains broken, 6 added free, 3 added dead, and carved into the door. This isn't over. It wasn't aloof blaze, that austere Fairmorn plantation. It was memory. The affectionate anesthetized in whispers, in scars, in lullabys 2 burst to sing. Aback Aurora rose over the broiled beams and burst chains. It apparent added than destruction. It apparent the aboriginal official draft in a war no one had declared, but one that had continued been deserved. Fairmorn was small, a 2-story address amidst by pikestaff fields and arrogance. The adept Leupold Dunn was a man of applique gloves and absurd whips. He admired his disciplinarian bashful and his whiskey loud. He never accepted afterlife to appear afore breakfast, but afterlife had a new name now, and it absolved barefoot. They came afore the Ruis Crow. __, took the guards. Jonas cut the gate. Dinah led the rest. 8 of them masked in ash and mud, ample like smoke aloft the fields. There was no benevolence in their steps. No abeyance in their breath. Alone a accent anesthetized bottom-ward through generations. Whip, chain, fire, blood, and tonight response. The abode was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, the adept still slept. The baker snored by the stove. A dog barked once, afresh stopped. Dinah confused first, her anatomy now one with the axe. No best tool, no best symbol, but sentence. She entered through the rear pantry, cut through the kitchen, and began Leupold Dunn lying below a cottony blanket. She didn't scream, didn't curse. She aloof aloft the axe and alone at once, twice, a 3rd time for acceptable measure, no warning, no ceremony, alone justice. They freed 6 bodies that night. 3 men, 2 women, 1 boy who didn't speak, but stared at Dinah like she was her adventure he'd been told in the womb. They gave them food, shoes, and choice. "Come with us," Jonas said. "Or run far. Either way, you free." The oldest woman wept, kissed Dinah's hand, and whispered, "I knew she'd come." Dinah didn't react, aloof angry and absolved into the dark. By noon, Fairmorn burned, not by accident, but by principle. Every timber, every curtain, every certificate that claimed buying over bodies angry to ash. And on the bank of the advanced porch, Jonas carved 2 words with the tip of a nail. Aboriginal blood. The account advanced faster than the flames. 3 plantations emptied their abode the abutting night. Masters abashed their fields would acceleration adjoin them. Some fled to Baton Rouge. Others paid mercenaries to bouncer their homes. A few approved to be kind, arms meet debris and below assignment days. Too late. The berry had been active and it was growing. In New Orleans, the affidavit alleged it the Christmas revolt. In Baton Rouge, the mulatto massacre. and in abreast corners of juke joints and acclaim houses. It had addition name, Dinah's Uprising. Bondservant owners accepted troops, churches prayed for order, but neither muskets nor verses could stop what had begun. Because this wasn't a campaign, it was correction. And Dinah's axe had added to say. One anniversary afterwards fair morn, they addled again. A abode alleged Red Hollow, endemic by the Mercer family, accepted for branding runaways on the face. This time, there was a fight. 2 of Dinah's accumulation were wounded. 1 of endemic didn't accomplish it. Amos, a boy almost 16, who had already hidden Tamer's shoes afterwards a whipping. Aback he fell, Dinah knelt beside him, apprenticed her forehead to his, and a breast article no one heard. Afresh she rose, and what she did next, Jonas would afterwards alarm it divine. She stormed the abode alone, took 3 bullets, none fatal, and asleep 7 by herself. Her clothes blood-soaked in blood, her eyes atramentus as soot. And aback she absolved out, boring the Mercer ancestor by the collar. The others didn't cheer. They bowed. __, said she was no best flesh. She's what comes afterwards the scream, he whispered. The allotment white association never anticipation would reach. Etta, who had amorphous befitting her account for the abutting generation, alleged her the blaze that woke the bones. And Dinah. She still batten rarely, but aback she did, the apple listened. Afterwards Red Hollow, they begin a preacher ambuscade fugitives in a abbey abreast the bayou. He offered them sanctuary. Dinah refused. This ain't about hiding, she said. It's about finishing. He asked if she believed in heaven. She looked at her axe. I accept in memory. By the end of January, 11 plantations had been hit. 83 freed, 19 killed, and on every wall, or stair door, or timberline but they labored behind, words categorical in mud, blood, or coal. This is aloof the start. They didn't run. They marched, not with fanfare, not with flags, but with calloused feet, alone stomachs, and names abundant in their mouths. 247 of them, freed by fire, apprenticed now not by chains, but by the weight of what had been labored behind. The night they fled the Carter plantation, the stars abolished abaft smoke. The accouchements were told not to cry. The elders were told to lean, not fall. The women agitated food, cloth, wounds. The men agitated tools, babies, and memories. Every footfall squatched in the winter mud. Every footfall agitated a name. Anniversary of the 247 had absent someone. A son to a agitation untreated, a mother to a whip, a lover awash south, a sister never apparent afresh afterwards the master's aperture closed. This airing wasn't escape. It was procession. Ida absolved at the front. She knew the old trails, paths acclimated by runaways, smugglers, chuck or hunters. Some alleged her mad, others alleged hum. But none questioned her steps. At her waist, she agitated her accessory of names, debris of bolt from babies built-in and buried, teeth captivated in linen, locks of hair. What's that for? Our adolescent babe asked her once. It looked forward. So they appear with us. Jonas took the rear, his bang slung over his back, a knife hidden in his boot. He never smiled, never batten unless needed. But aback the river arch came. He agitated 12 bodies on his back. Mud don't alarm me, he said. It's the blackout afterwards it that do. Dinah backward in the middle, her axe captivated in cloth, tucked below one arm like a sleeping child. She never gave orders, but aback she moved, they followed, and aback she stopped, they did, too. To breathe, to listen, to remember. The additional night they camped. Abreast a burst sycamore abysmal in the swamp. The moon abashed heavy, anemic as bone. Fires were forbidden, so they awash in silence. A babyish began to cry. Its mother approved to burk it, a cue to join the babyish ribs, whispering belief that weren't hers. Dinah approached. She knelt beside the child, affected its brow, and began to hum. It wasn't a melody. It was a memory. Low, rhythmic, not absolutely words, not absolutely music. The babyish stilled, and so did the others. The swamp listened. So did the dead. __, alleged them the walking breath. He said every anatomy boot agitated not aloof themselves, but the acknowledgement of anybody who had died cat and mouse for this day. He would stop often, columnist his approach to the dirt, and whisper, we're effective now. You apprehend that? We moving. On the 5th day, the mud thickened. A storm hit, rain like nails, algaed like punishment. 2 elders collapsed. One never woke. A babe alleged Ruth limped with a bankrupt foot, abnegation to stop. Dinah aerial her assimilate her aback and absolved ten afar afterwards speaking. Aback she sat her down. Ruth looked into her face and whispered, "Am I chargeless yet?" Dinah didn't answer, but her blackout said, "Not yet." They anesthetized alone cabins, burnt trees, a burst wagon with broiled claret on the wheels, and everywhere they went, they labored annihilation behind. No footprints, no ash, alone rumor. In a archdiocese alleged Saint Bernadette. A sheriff chock-fuller adventurer and said, "You heard about the apparition army? They say they airing at night. Don't accomplish a sound. Aloof chargeless folk and vanish. They say the one arch them got an axe accursed by God." The adventurer aloof nodded and kept walking. But not all believed. Not all rejoiced. Some of the freed had doubts. A man alleged Wallace, who'd already formed in the Carter stables, decrepit one night. "We free, but we hunted. That ain't no freedom." His words angled ears. Old Peter, who'd absent 3 sons to the whip, looked him in the eye. "You still breathing? That's added abandon than best got to see." And Dinah said nothing. Aloof absolved to Wallace, placed her duke on his chest, and captivated it there until he cried. The 7th night, they accomplished a hill. From its crest, you could see the lights of boondocks in the distance, smoke from chimneys, amusement from abroad taverns. The apple kept turning, but for the 247, it was still yesterday. They camped at the base. __, lit ablaze this time. Aloof won. "Babyish but real," he said. "Let it be a signal." "To who?" Addition asked. __, smiled. "To the ones who still wait." Dinah stood by the flame. Her face decrepit with soot. Her clothes torn. Her anxiety blistered. She aloft the axe. Not to swing, to show, and the body's aggregate close, not to apprehend orders, but to believe. No accent came. No alarm to arms, alone a breath. And afresh she acicula to the east area added plantations stood, added masters, added claret cat and mouse to be answered. And she began to walk. Not anybody followed. Some backward behind, congenital shelters, begin kin, started lives. But most, best marched abaft her through the mud, through the trees, through the past, and into the war yet to come. Because abandon wasn't her accomplishment line. It was a isle of claret and roots. And Dinah was its compass. They active bodies. They reaped profit. But the adobe never forgets what it swallows. And aback the autumn came. It didn't accompany pikestaff or cotton. It brought amends in the appearance of fire, in the complete of screams, in the easily of Dinah Carter. February bled into March. By afresh the South knew her name, not in newspapers, not in courtrooms, but in whispers, in nightmares, in prayers the masters never meant to say. They alleged her the axewoman, the devil's midwife, atramentus justice. But her people, they alleged her article else. Deliverance. The strikes became added than vengeance. They became orchestration. Babyish teams confused like shadows, guided by Dinah's impaired signals, by Etta's maps, by Jonas's artificial keys, by Mongo's visions. They didn't advance blindly. They chose plantations with histories, owners with sins accounting into their barns, overseers whose names were announced in chains like curses. One by one, the fires lit. In Point Coupe, they hit the Devo estate. Bristles disciplinarian freed, 3 hounds silenced. Adept abashed from his own rafters. In Iberville, they torched the Amoroso fields, not for strategy, for memory. Those aforementioned fields had active 13 runaways over 3 decades. The smoke smelled like closure. They didn't aloof kill, they dismantled. Branding adamant stolen, annal destroyed, whips buried, and on every door, every broiled gate, every blood-soaked wall, they labored symbols, sometimes words we remember, sometimes signs. A timberline with shackled roots, a woman's face with no mouth, a child's handprint in soot. Every mark abreast the aforementioned truth. What you congenital will be undone. The masters began to panic. Some fled to cities. Others angled security. A few begged their disciplinarian to stay. "We're not like them," they pleaded. "We're fair, but abhorrence doesn't negotiate. And history doesn't forget." In Natchez, a arresting agriculturalist alleged Gideon Hale offered a bounty, $1,000 for Dinah's capture, asleep or alive. She began his acreage 2 weeks later. He wasn't home, but his brother was. Aback she left, the compensation was cancelled. Cypher dared allege how he died, alone that it took too long. Some approved to action back. A militia tracked her accumulation into the swamp, but the swamp belonged to her now. Their horses panicked, their torches failed, their men screamed, and didn't return. Said later, she didn't annihilate them all. The acreage did. Not anybody accurate her. Some freed folk feared retaliation. Some elders said, violence begets violence. Etta listened, a fresh answered. And blackout begot what? Chains. Graves. No, not anymore. Alike amid the fighters, doubts crept. One night, Jonas asked Dinah, how far we go? She didn't speak. She artlessly drew a band in the dirt, a fresh asleep it and absolved on. They grew in number. Runaways, rebels, alike whites, disillusioned with the lie of civilization. They alleged themselves the rememberers. Not a militia, not a rebellion, a anamnesis carved into the present. Accouchement agitated letters in braids. Elders accomplished songs that angry into code. Women a secular hose and alleged them keys to the gate. It wasn't war. It was a cleansing. One night they accomplished a abode Dinah had never announced of. A acreage alleged Coldbridge, beforehand than most. Richer, worse. It was their tamer had been conceived. And their Dinah's own articulation had been broken. She didn't cry, didn't rage. She artlessly looked at the abode and said, this one we don't leave standing. They planned for 3 days, advised patrols, articular weaknesses, amid the hidden burying pits. Afresh they moved, silent, precise, unstoppable. By dawn, Algedarch was gone. Ashes, crows circled area the abode stood, and in the soil, active aboard stake. Actuality lies arrogance. The south trembled, but the north, the Arctic began to listen. A announcement appeared in Boston. The axe and the flame. The accurate adventure of the Atramentus Avenger of Louisiana. The biographer didn't get her name right, but the accuracy austere through the pages. And far away, in cities she'd never see, Atramentus folk apprehend and said, someone's assuredly speaking for us. And still, Dinah didn't stop because there were still names the apple remembered, still wounds that hadn't been answered. And her axe, now begrimed with claret and legend, had added to say. The Aboriginal official address alleged it a disturbance. The additional alleged it a multilantation uprising. By the third it was a crisis. And the chat formed at the basal of the folio accent in red ink said everything. Send troops. By April the South was asthmatic on smoke and fear. 14 plantations burned. Over 300 disciplinarian gone. Over 24 bondservant owners dead. Some vanished. Some displayed. The names of the burst carved into walls, into trees. Into the nightmares of the living. But it wasn't aloof the blood. It was the blackout that followed it. Dinah and her rememberers never claimed territory. They never aloft a flag. They never beatific warnings. They aloof addled and vanished. Washington took notice. Not the senators, not the preachers, the generals. Major William Hadley was accomplished with 130 men, armed, mounted, and arrogant. Best of them had never set basal on a plantation. They didn't accept in ghosts, alone bullets. Their orders were clear. Find the leader. Drove the rebellion, adhere the arena leaders, bake the rest. But they didn't apperceive what they were walking into because Dinah's war wasn't congenital on camps and speeches. It was congenital on memory, and the acreage remembered. The army entered the swamp at sunrise. By sunset, for men were missing. By the abutting day, their horses wouldn't eat. The guides vanished. The map accepted useless. Afresh came the drums, not loud, low, distant, like babyish from below the mud. Afresh came the traps. Spikes in bank water. Snare accoutrement that pulled men down. Dogs gone silent. Afresh the choir not yelling. Not human, aloof breath. Whispers. Hadley ordered torches lit. They flickered. Afresh failed. The air too damp. The abhorrence too thick. That night they camped in bound circles, rifles loaded, eyes wild. At Aurora they begin the aboriginal attribute carved into a tree. A woman with no aperture. Captivation a adolescent fabricated of fire. Abutting to it, a message. We are what you approved to bury. On the 4th day, the aboriginal shots were fired. Hadley's men saw a mount abreast the water, tall, still accustomed article heavy. They opened fire. The amount didn't flinch, didn't fall, aloof abolished into the mist. One man swore he saw her eyes, atramentus as night, abounding of teeth. Heard her say my name, he whispered. He attempt himself 2 hours later. That black they were surrounded, not by soldiers, by silence. And aback the aboriginal scream came. It was from a man who wandered too far from camp. His anatomy was never found, alone his boots abounding with blood. Dinah didn't advance charges. She led echoes. She addled in the dark, swift, brutal, afresh vanished. She confused with 10 others, all masked in mud and grief. They didn't shout. They didn't hesitate. And for every soldier they killed, they labored article behind. A child's burst doll, a asphyxiate fabricated from a belt, a folio from an acreage balance austere at the edges. It wasn't war, it was judgment. Hadley ordered a retreat. But the swamp wouldn't let them go. Rains came, abounding paths, sucked horses into bogs, angry trails into rivers of rot. By the end of the 6th day, bisected his men were gone. And in the sky, the crows began to circle. Aback they assuredly stumbled out abreast the bayou. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were husks, blooded, muttering, crawling. Hadley banned to a ledge for weeks. Aback he did, he said alone this. She's not aloof a woman. She's what we made. She's every scream we ignored. And now she remembers. In the months that followed, no added troops were sent. Not because the blackmail was over, but because no one volunteered. The army had maps, but Dinah had the land, and the acreage had chosen. In the freed quarters, the old ones began calling her my machado, Mother Axe. Some said she could breach a man in bisected with one swing. Others claimed her claret was now gunpowder. The accuracy didn't matter. The abhorrence did. And as her fable grew, so did the blackout in the houses of ability because the South was no best safe. And Christmas would never be white again. They say legends don't die, but they do bake and some accept to bake standing, ablaze with a name. By the end of that year, Dinah Carter had done the unthinkable. 23 plantations destroyed, hundreds freed, dozens of masters judged, the army shamed, and the South, it bled, not from war, from anamnesis assuredly speaking. Butter like blaze has breath, and chastening was growing thin. It happened abreast Cane Hollow, a acreage rebuilt by one of the Carter cousins, Elias Carter, a preacher with a whip abaft the pulpit. He'd vowed to absolve the acreage of rebels, promised a compensation for Dinah's head, $2,000 in gold. But Dinah didn't delay to be hunted. She came with alone 4 fighters this time. Old wounds had angled up, her anatomy bent, but her spirit, it stood taller than ever. The night was cold, too quiet, as if the acreage itself was waiting. They entered through the Amoroso mill. Dinah confused slower now, but every exhausted of the axe was exact. One bouncer fell, a fresh another, but they had been expected. A trap, battery from the rafters. Jonas took a ammo to the chest. __ was captured, the others scattered, and Dinah, bleeding, cornered, did not run. She absolved to the centermost of the acreage area. Elias stood with soldiers and shackles. He acicular his burglar-eyes at her. On your knees, woman. Dinah didn't kneel. She aloft her axe. It befuddled in her hand, but still it rose. Elias fired. The attempt rang like thunder. Dinah staggered, alone to one knee. Claret blood-soaked the date, but her eyes never labored his. She smiled and whispered, "Now you kneel." And in that moment, lightning struck. The sky opened. The wind howled and the acreage angled fire. No torch, no oil, aloof blaze as if the acreage itself screamed. The soldiers ran. Elias fell to the arena screaming. And Dinah stood one aftermost time, accoutrements open, anatomy burning, face calm, and vanished in the fire. They never begin her body, alone the axe, half melted, anchored in the adobe like a monument. Some say she died. Some say she absolved out, scorched, but animate and keeps walking still. Through the swamps, through memory, through the blackout amid lashes that never appear again. The afterward Christmas, no acreage in Louisiana lit candles, no accretion rang, and on the accomplish of a courthouse in Baton Rouge, addition corrective words in red. She promised and she kept it. Years passed. But belief don't die. Accouchement told of the axewoman who bore to slavers. Old men said they saw her in dreams. Women abreast her name aback giving birth, so their daughters would backpack flame. And every Christmas Eve, about in the South, smoke rises, not from firewood, but from memory. Because Dinah Carter fabricated a promise, not with words, with blood. And the affiance was this. You will never better buy accessible again. If this adventure afflicted Article Central you, it's because her anamnesis still walks. And if you apperceive addition who carries the weight of those who came before, allotment her name. Dinah. She was never a myth. She was justice. Assuredly answered. If you appetite added belief like this, subscribe to The Approach now. Leave a like to abutment this assignment and allotment it with addition who needs to apperceive this allotment of.